state.
For sure.
So maybe we just need a ready supply of this to go dreaming every night.
Well, I think that's a very strong possibility, that the production of dreams is mediated through elevated levels of DMT. The whole question of whether or not the pineal gland makes DMT it's still not really been definitively determined. But even if the pineal gland weren't the only location for the production of DMT, there's plenty of other organs in the body which have been quite well documented to produce it.
Then there must be something to do with the pineal gland about putting out another enzyme or hormone that regulates its use, because it's timed. We must use it in the body during the sleep cycles and during mystical moments, and you say during other accidental releases.
Well, for sure. I think there's probably a role for chronically small levels of DMT circulating in our brains at all times. One of the most interesting elements of DMT is that it's actively transported into the brain across a gradient, which is the case only with a very few precious food sources and other things that the brain requires for normal function.
So it's hardwired to use it.
It seems hardwired, both to use it and to kind of seek it out, as if a certain amount of DMT is required for normal brain function. And if you blockade the effects of DMT with, let's say, antipsychotic medications, like, for example, if you give a normal volunteer an antipsychotic medication which blocks DMT, it seems to sort of flatten out the perception of the world. Things become rather gray and dull and lifeless. So it might be the case that people require a certain amount of DMT just as a maintenance sort of way of keeping our perceptual apparatus as sharp and bright as it normally is.
When you think about it, though, I mean, what is a perceptual apparatus doing but creating an illusion that has its cues in the natural world and the vibrations around us? But
well, I think so. It's a bit of a startling idea when you think about it. If you, it's almost as if this compound is a thermostat for our version of reality. And if it gets up, if levels become too high, let's say for any number of these scenarios that I describe in the book, or else if you ingest large amounts of DMT, then clearly you break through the threshold to hold an entirely different realm of consciousness and existence.
And then your seeing apparatus is able to go along with you in order to perceive it. So, wow. How fascinating. So how long have you been actively involved with dimethyltryptamine, DMT?
Well, I began all of the required paperwork to get the study going in 1988. It was going to be the first new human psychedelic research in a generation. These human studies first really began, like I was mentioning before, with the discovery of LSD around 1942, 44 or so.
Maybe we should take a moment to get a quick history of the study of psychedelics, because yours is really the latest chapter in a long story.
Pretty much. Well, it's not that long a story when you look at the whole historical perspective of these plants, but in terms of modern Western science, it's not been that long that people have actually systematically investigated the effects and biology of these drugs.
Where did we begin? Where did hallucinogens first come on the scene? It was LSD, wasn't it?
Pardon?
You're the expert on this. You tell me the story.
Yeah. Well, the first kind of studies in, I guess, what you'd call contemporary scientific investigation occurred around the turn around the late 1890s, early 1900s, with the discovery of mescaline in peyote cactus. And the Germans performed some studies early on. There are a few American studies, but for any number of reasons, people really were not that interested in the effects of mescaline. It was kind of
You point out that people were vomiting and it's nauseous, so it's not a very pleasant compound to take.
Well, yeah, it caused an enormous number of physical side effects, and also I think an issue is just the scientific culture wasn't really prepared to understand what it was doing to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So there were maybe 10, 15 studies of mescaline around the turn of last century, but it wasn't until the discovery of LSD, which actually took place at around the same time as the discovery of serotonin. And once people were able to actually investigate the interaction of serotonin in the brain with the effects of LSD in the brain, that there actually could be a way of understanding how these drugs produce their psychological effects.
Tell us about serotonin.
Well, serotonin was first discovered in blood vessels, actually, and then it was discovered in the gut, the intestines, the stomach, and the like. And then it was discovered in the brain. It was the first of obviously many neurotransmitters which were discovered that were involved in communication among and between neurons in the brain. And its discovery, as well as the discovery of LSD and the anti-LSD or antipsychotic effects of drugs like Thorazine, all took place at around the same time, in the late 1940s or so. And so the discovery of those three compounds at around the same time kind of ushered in what I guess is known as the modern era of psychopharmacology, the effects of drugs on the brain and consciousness.
You know, I've heard from those who've gone down to indigenous cultures and studied with shamans, that bioprospectors and such, that they don't observe any mental illness in indigenous cultures. The shamans take care of it; it just doesn't arise.
Uh-huh.
But look at this culture and look at all the crazy people and the disturbed people. And so I can understand early on if you look at, well, here's something that activates hallucinations, and here's something over here, Thorazine, that quiets it down.
Right.
And we see crazy people not being able to control these hallucinations. What's going. I can understand where they got freaked out about. Well, if it's a hallucination, it's bad. Whereas the indigenous people had very controlled ways, safe ways, I guess. Who knows? Maybe we didn't hear about the disaster stories of using these substances and for a spiritual purpose. So is there a true comparison in all the investigation you've done between what's happening in a crazy person, I don't know what the technical term you would want to use, and the safe and mediated use of hallucinogens in a culture that uses them in a sacred way?
Well, that's a big question.
We can tackle that on down the road if we put those pieces together.
Yeah.
And you can see early on where, geez.
Well, I think one thing that may occur in not quite as technologically advanced cultures is more of a premium placed on non-ordinary states of mind.
But it wasn't for a long time before we actually looked at what shamans were doing, what indigenous cultures were doing, and honored the fact that A, these were sacred states of mind, and B, they were normal states of mind.
Right, and oftentimes those cultures place a larger stock on the value of dreams as well.
Yeah.
And it's only been the last 100 years that people actually in psychology in the West have put much merit in the investigation and the analysis of dreams.
And it's only recently that we've looked back at our heritage of the indigenous cultures and honored all that they had to bring to the table. And
Well,
look at them as primitive savages, and we are so full of progress here.
Well, yes, especially their familiarity and comfort with the spiritual realms, the non-material realms, which have kind of taken a hit in our culture, which is mostly focused on things that can be objectively measured and observed.
Right. And, if they weren't Christian, they were of the devil. I mean, that attitude prevailed not so many decades ago.
Well, it still does, I think.
I thought we'd gotten over that one.
Well, in Bellevue, maybe, but...
and that all that they did was mere superstition. Now